That's right. I hit the wrong button. I hit stop instead of pause. Sorry about that. So this is part two of that lecture for today. We were talking about thermogenesis, and to continue on that, some mammals have, excuse me, special tissue called brown fat, and brown fat allows for rapid heat production. They've actually found that some humans, we don't in general have brown fat, but people who live in really cold environments like Alaska, and beyond up towards the pole, they tend to have areas of brown fat on their body, and that produces very rapid heat production to help keep them warm. Um, you do find it as well in some infants in different species. In terms of the regulation of thermoregulation, that's controlled by an area of the brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus can trigger either you to lose heat or to generate heat, depending on the circumstance. A fever, um, while not necessarily comfortable, a fever is going to be initiated from the hypothalamus, and that is raising our body's temperature just enough that the infection, hopefully, the proteins of whatever's infecting us. So, like if it's a bacteria that's infecting us, bacterial infection or a viral infection, um, typically those proteins don't work very well at an elevated body temperature. So, by elevating your body's temperature, that tends to denature the proteins of these infections, of these little organisms, and as a result, you feel kind of crappy, but it fights off the infection and you feel better. Ectotherms don't have that fever ability, so they will actually they'll try if they're fighting off an infection, they will try to find warmer places to be so that they can raise their body temperature behaviorally. Okay, so here is an example of, we're going to see several of these diagrams. Again, we have this homeostasis idea. We have a set point. Our set point in this case is our normal body temperature, which is around 37 degrees Celsius. Or more commonly, in the United States, we more commonly refer to it as 98.6 Fahrenheit, but it's the same thing. Um, and as the body temperature starts to increase, the hypothalamus here in the brain is going to say, "Hey, nope, that's not what we want. We want to cool back down," and so it will dilate the skin. Those peripheral capillaries and veins will dilate, and so you'll get more blood flow to the sorry, not veins, arteries will dilate, and you'll get more blood flow to the extremities, to your fingers, your toes, and you'll also sweat. Body temperature decreases and everything's back to normal again. Same thing with if you start to get too cold, hypothalamus is going to get activated again, but this time it's going to constrict those blood vessels. So your fingers are going to get cold, but your heart and your lungs and your liver and all your important organs are going to stay nice and toasty. And then it's also going to cause your muscles to start shivering, and that will raise your temperature back up. Okay. All right. Okay. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of the um, more about energy with regards to thermal regulation. Bioenergetics is not really a term that we're going to necessarily worry too much about. Excuse me. It's just the overall movement of energy throughout the body. But some of the important things that come out of bioenergetics we do want to talk about. And one of those is metabolic rate. So metabolism, we've talked about metabolism before, but I don't know if we've really defined it very well. Metabolism is the sum of all of the chemical reactions that are going on in the body, and all of the energy that's being used and being released in the body. So it's a combination of catabolism and anabolism, both of those things. The metabolic rate, so how fast those reactions are occurring, can be determined by things such as an animal's heat loss. If you are an animal that is in an environment where it's very cold, you're going to lose more heat. And that then also has to do with, if you're more active for whatever reason, if you're using more oxygen, or if you're producing more carbon dioxide. Again, that would be a sign of what activity would that be? That would be cellular respiration. Okay, so if you've got more, if you're using more oxygen or you're releasing more carbon dioxide, that's a sign that you're doing more cell respiration, producing more energy. And that could be because you are more active. You're running around. You're not sitting at a desk stationary. And then also, metabolic rate is going to be based on looking at the energy and the food that you consume, as well as the energy that's lost. So, are you eating more food than you're losing in terms of waste, or are you the opposite way? Are you gaining more food and storing more energy? So, all those play into your metabolic rate. Let's talk a little bit more about basal metabolic rate. That is the rate of a endotherm, like us, for example, at a comfortable, resting at a comfortable temperature. So just sitting inside, watching TV or doing something that's not terribly energetic. You're not running a mile. You're not actively lifting weights. You're not doing anything. You're not sleeping, right? So you're awake. You're functional, but you're not really doing too much. That is the basal metabolic rate. That assumes that you're in a non-growing, fasting, in other words, you're not currently eating, and non-stressed animal. That is obviously not going to apply to teenagers. So for many of you, you're going to have a different metabolic rate from other individuals who are no longer growing. We'll come back to that in just a second. Ectotherms tend to have a lower metabolic rate than endotherms do, and that is because they tend to not be using as much energy as endotherms do. And remember, we talked about endothermy being very energetic. It's very not very energetic. It's very costly in terms of energy. It requires a lot of heat. A lot of energy to be an endotherm compared to an ectotherm. An ectotherm is more kind of passive. It just goes into the sun, or whatever they can do to stay warmer. Metabolic rates can also be influenced by other factors. Some of those key things are, like I talked about before, your age. Teenagers are going to have a faster metabolism rate. Sex. Biological males tend to have a faster metabolism than biological females. The size, the bigger the organism, the smaller the metabolic rate. I'm going to show you a graph on that in a second. Activity, the more active you are, the higher your metabolic rate is going to be. The warmer you are, the more metabolic rate you're going to have. The colder you are, the higher your metabolic rate will be. As well as nutrition, depending on what you're eating. That can affect your metabolic rate as well. This is a picture of, this is out of your textbook, and it says the smaller the animal, the higher the BMR or metabolic rate. And the question is, why is that? So we've got these little tiny critters, a shrew, a harvest mouse, and just a regular old-fashioned mouse, compared to an elephant and a horse. And I'm actually not going to answer this question right now. I'm going to let you think about it and see if you can figure out why the metabolic rate would be higher in a smaller organism. And I could give you a hint, but I'm afraid if I give you a hint, it'll totally give it away. Let's just say we're looking again at body mass. Okay, so that's the body mass of the critter, in other words, the volume of the critter. And I'll just leave it at that and see if you can tease that out. And then next time I will explain what that means. Activity level can affect metabolic rate. The more active you are, the higher your metabolic needs are going to be, the more energy you're going to need. So you're going to have to be metabolically um, more active to get all of the energy that you're needing, and that's going to drive up that rate. In general, the maximum metabolic rate of an animal can sustain is inversely related to the duration of the activity. That's just a fancy way of saying the harder you go, the shorter a period of time you can maintain it, right? You can't do a 50-meter dash for, you can't do that effort, excuse me, for, 10 minutes. That's just, it's a pace that's way, way too hard. Okay. Your body has to slow down. It can't meet the energy requirements of that pace. It would have to slow down. So, the more violent the effort, the harder the effort, the less time you're going to be able to sustain it. This is kind of a fun one as we go into fall and winter, torpor and hibernation. So torpor is, in some animals, they can significantly decrease their metabolic rate when the seasons change. And that can be a life-saving event, because what that does is it allows animals to not have to go out and forage when it's really cold out, and it could be excuse me, it could be very dangerous for them to do so. If it's a really cold day, if they could reduce their metabolic demands, that would help a lot. So there are a lot of animals that do that, and believe it or not, one of them that does that we often think are in a different category are bears. So bears go through what is called torpor. They don't actually do what's called hibernation. They are not long-term torpor where an animal really goes pretty dormant in the wintertime. It doesn't come out for a couple months at a time. That is not something that bears do. So bears are not true hibernators. I do have a picture of a true hibernator, a little mouse, that I'm going to show you at the end of this slideshow. Metabolic rates during hibernation can be 20 times lower than that normal one. So it's really, it's much, much lower. And that allows them to, not have to worry so much about energy and go dormant for a while. The biological clocks can also stop oscillating, so that helps as well. This little guy here is a dormouse, which is a rodent. It's a mouse. You can see his little cute little eye there. There's his little eye. There's his little tail. And he is an actual true hibernator. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do one more concept for you, and then I'll let you work on your study guides today. This one's a really important one. This is chapter 41, so yeah, we're moving around, but it's just so we can talk about homeostasis, because a lot of these things are part of the systems, but we want to talk about them now when we're talking about homeostasis. So the body stores energy-rich molecules that are not needed for metabolism right away. In other words, not everything you eat in a meal will be digested and used as ATP immediately. Some of that will be stored and then be used later on, because you're not eating constantly through the day. You're eating a meal, and then you're fasting, you're going without food for a while, and then you're having, go lunch, don't have anything until dinner. So some of those molecules are going to get stored, and they're going to get used during that period when you're not actively eating. In humans, energy is first stored in the liver and the muscle cells in the polymer glycogen. So remember, glycogen is our polymer of the monomer. Remember what the monomer was? Glucose. Okay, so in things like plants, glucose is going to be stored as starch, but in us, glucose is going to get stored as glycogen, and the liver and the muscle are going to have very large stores of glycogen. Anything excess that the body doesn't think it's going to use in the next 6 hours, that's going to get stored in fat tissue, which we call adipose tissue. When fewer calories are taken in than expected, the first thing that's going to happen, is the body is going to get rid of its glycogen that's found in the liver and then in the muscle. And then the last thing that will get used is the fat stores. So athletes, one of the things that's very important after you do a workout, your body is like, whoa, where did that come from? And the first thing it will do is it'll take that glycogen and it will break it down into glucose, and it will use that as that glucose will be used to go through cell respiration and generate ATP. So after you work out, you want to make sure that you have a carbohydrate-rich recovery drink or meal to replace those stores of glycogen right away. And there's also been a lot of, I think if I was going back to school now, I would have probably been an exercise physiologist, because I love talking about exercise and the physiology of it. There's been a lot of studies that have shown that having protein along with your carbohydrate as a recovery drink is important, because that protein helps facilitate the recovery and the replenishment of the glycogen stores in the liver and in the muscle. So just keep that in mind if you are an athlete. There's a lot of stuff out there. So read stuff carefully when you're looking at labels, because it's not always, people are trying to make money, and they're not always, those recovery drinks are not always the best. Okay, so let's talk about the homeostasis of glucose. So when you eat, your body is going to break down its food, and one of the things that it's going to be broken down into is glucose. And maintaining that blood glucose level and maintaining some of that glucose as glycogen is very important in terms of your metabolism. And there's two hormones that are going to be important in that. And we haven't really talked too much about hormones yet. If you remember from earlier, when we were talking about macromolecules, lipids, hormones are lipids. They are steroids. There are steroid hormones. They're not all steroids, my bad. But these hormones can be lipid, or they could also be protein. These two particular hormones are protein, and we'll come back to what that means a little bit later. The protein, I will just put this in here because actually several days from now, but we are going to talk about what this word means, and we're going to say that these are hydro. Oops, that's not hydro. Let me just clear that screen out. Do that again. And these proteins are hydrophilic. Okay, that means that they like water. And that's important when we talk about how insulin and glucagon, these two hormones, get across the cell membrane. And I'm just going to leave it at that right now. So just remember that these are hydrophilic. They are also proteins. And we will talk about what that means probably in about a week or so. But let's just leave it there for now. So insulin, I'm sure you're familiar with, and probably less familiar with the hormone glucagon. So these two are usually in opposites to each other. So if you have a high level of insulin, you're going to have a low amount of glucagon, and vice versa. So the liver is the site of where glucose homeostasis is kept. So in your liver, you're going to have a lot of glycogen being made if you don't need the glucose, or you're going to have a lot of glucose being made if you don't need the glycogen. So couple of scenarios. A carbohydrate-rich meal. So you have some pasta, you have a good carbohydrate meal. that will trigger the body to increase its insulin levels, and that will cause glucose to be made into glycogen. Okay, so glucose is going to get made into glycogen when you eat, and the hormone responsible for that is going to be insulin. Now, let's say it's the end of fifth period, and you're waiting to have lunch, and you're so hungry. Now you have low blood sugar. In other words, you have low glucose in your blood. That glucose is necessary for all of the cells in your body. You need that glucose. You need that until the next meal to continue cell respiration and generating energy in the form of ATP. So something has to be done. So when the blood sugar becomes low, that will cause insulin levels to raise. So glucagon will be released, and that will cause glycogen to be broken down into glucose. Okay, so when you're hungry, your sugar, your glucose levels are low, glucagon gets released and causes glycogen to be made into glucose. This is a really good example of homeostasis, and one that gets tested on often. So I want to make sure that you really understand that. So let's look at this diagram on the next page here. And let me erase that piece there. Okay, so now we talked about glucagon, we talked about insulin, but we didn't talk about what makes or what organ makes that. And that is, well, let me start off with the center here. So we've got normal blood sugar is this level. You do not need to remember these levels. That's not a thing. But there's a normal blood glucose level that you need to maintain. If you're hungry, it's getting close to mealtime and you haven't had anything to eat, there is an organ called your pancreas. Excuse me. You cannot live without your pancreas. The pancreas is it is an essential organ that you have to have, because you will produce two hormones from the pancreas. The first one is glucagon. And remember, glucagon is going to cause the liver to break down glycogen and release the glycogen as glucose into the blood. Okay, that makes the blood glucose rise back up until your next meal, and your body's happy, and you don't get bonked. You don't feel like really fatigued, because those glycogen stores will be replaced, or will be are being released. Now, that's short term. This isn't going to work forever. So, you can't go all day long without eating, because, you really feel weird. You feel shaky. You can't think. And that's because of the fact that there's only so much glycogen in the liver, and and the muscle as well. And if you use that up, then your body is trying to break apart fat, and it doesn't do a very good job of that. It's not going to go for very long. It's not going to do a good job of doing that for very long. So let's say instead you've just eaten a meal. Now the pancreas is going to release another hormone, a different hormone called insulin. And that's going to cause the liver to now bring in glucose out of the blood. So now we're going to take it out of the blood, and we're going to store it in the cells, such as your liver and your muscles, as glycogen. You're going to store it as glycogen. You're going to change it from glucose, and you're going to put it back into glycogen. And now we get a normal blood sugar. Okay. So I think I'm going to finish off here, and then I'm going to talk about some complications of this next time. But let me just show this last slide before I do. Insulin acts on nearly all the body's body cells to stimulate glucose uptake. The brain is an exception. Glucose typically in all the other cells needs to have insulin to say knock knock. You need to come. You need to let glucose in, and then glucose will be transported in. Brain cells can actually take up glucose whether or not insulin is present or not, and we believe that's because if you can't think, um, then you can't also do things like breathe, right? Because part of your brain is respiration and beating of your heart and things that are very important. So whether or not insulin is present, glucose can be taken in. So that's an exception to that. Glucagon and insulin are both part of the pancreas. They're little areas that they call islets. You don't need to worry about the islets part, but you have to have a pancreas. One of the most deadly forms of cancer is pancreatic cancer. It has a very low survival rate, and that's because if that fails on you, you can no longer maintain your metabolism, and then everything else is going to tank after that. I'm pretty sure you don't need to remember this, but the islets, those cells, the ones that make glucagon are called alpha cells, and the beta cells make insulin. But I'm pretty sure that's been taken out of the. I don't think you need to know that for the AP exam, so I'm not going to worry about it either. Let me check on that, and I will get back to you tomorrow on that. Okay, I'm not going to do this because this is going to take a little bit of time, and I want to spend some time on it. If the pancreas isn't working right and it's not releasing insulin, you get a condition called diabetes mellitus. And we're going to talk about diabetes mellitus tomorrow. It'll take a little bit of time because it really does mess up the homeostasis. And there's so many people that have this that I think it's worth a little bit of time to talk about. So I'm going to leave you here. And please work on your study guide up to this point, up to diabetes. And then tomorrow we will talk about diabetes and probably, let me see where I'm at in the notes here. Yeah, probably tomorrow I will introduce the project for this portion of Unit 4A. I know we got one person who I think is going to be gone tomorrow and Friday, and one person gone Friday. Email me and I can send you the project. And for the person gone Friday, we can talk about it tomorrow. Well, I think everyone will talk about it tomorrow. For that person who's gone on Thursday, I don't think it's too hard to figure out, so I don't think you're going to need any real help from me. If you do, please email me, even if it's a weekend, and I'll try and get back to you. And we'll go from there. All right. Hope to see you tomorrow.